Are we ready then?
Go ahead.
Let's go. All right. Welcome back to another podcast. This is Clayton Vance with Timeless Homes, and it has been a busy week for me. I am tired, but hopefully today we will have some fun. Today what we're going to talk about is three things which have completely changed houses today from historical stuff. One of those is the kitchen, another one is the bathroom, and another one is the infamous garage. What do we do with the garage? Because this is really, really, really important to cover and understand. Not just cover, but really understand what's happened over the last however many years we've been doing this, designing houses and whatever, thousands of years, but particularly in the U.S., right, as we had property ownership, unlike most of the rest of the planet. So in the U.S., you could own land and put a house on land, and so in Europe, you had very urban conditions where everything was, all the houses were right. It was all just one giant city, and then you had these estate types of houses and farmers and that type of stuff. And then in the U.S., we had a similar sort of thing, but everything was spread out a little bit more, and everyone started with a plot of land to be able to farm. And then as we really transitioned in through with the car, really the invention of the car over the last 100 and whatever years, that has changed the game entirely, because now we can get from here to there so quick. We're not bound by our feet or horses. And when we're not bound by our feet or horses, all of a sudden we can spread out a lot faster, a lot easier, and get places a lot quicker. And that's a huge game changer. And the kitchen and everything is shifted kind of socially. And so how do you deal with, let's look at historically how they dealt with kitchens, right? Because if you look what I've got done, I'm surrounded by books here, right? I've thrown up a whole bunch of books. I've got information in houses and stuff from the 1500s, 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. And it's fascinating to see how things have evolved through time. And if we go back 500 years ago, when people are designing dwellings, right? What you have is just a collection of rooms. In urban scenarios, you really didn't have much say in how those things were configured, because you had wall, and then you just fill in the space between the two walls. But in rural spaces, you could compose it a little bit more, but it would be very, very formal, right? And very regularized openings. But all the openings, that would be behind it would be a room, and it was just a room. It wasn't like a bathroom or a bedroom. It was a room, and then you would just fill up that room with furniture pieces to utilize however you saw fit. And anyone who's been to some old historic, palace or whatever back in Europe, you've walked through these rooms and understand that. And when you're walking through those, some of us do wonder, where do these people go to the bathroom? Where do they cook their food? Well, I guess they didn't cook their food. Servants cooked their food. But what on earth do we do with that? Because they're honestly not even relevant examples for us trying to design or build houses today at all. So if we go up another century and we get to kind of, I've got a book here from James Gibbs, and his country houses for like England and stuff, they're very, very similar to that of 150 years before. It's more or less a collection of rooms. Not a lot of transition over that 200-year time period in terms of how houses and buildings were used. in conjunction with society and kind of social cultural norms. But what happened in the 1700s? A lot happened in the 1700s. But some major things that were culturally world shifting was the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the ability to own land, which then gave you the ability to build a country house and to have your own farm. So you have this collection of writers and architects, landscape architects, and home designers, that type of stuff, who begin to surface. And as they begin to surface, you begin to see how they're helping shift cultural norms and societal norms in house design. And what happens is we now start labeling rooms and what the purpose of those rooms are, and the function of those rooms and the use of those rooms. And from the 1700s, what we see is that the kitchens were always relegated to the back, always in the back of the house. They weren't in the front of the house. And then as things shifted over the last 100 years, it went from back of house to sort of incorporated into the house to fully incorporated in the house of mid-century modern stuff about 70, 80 years ago. And then it became center of house and the primary place where all of the life happened, right? And you'll find this, I'm sure, lovely. But in this book, I was looking at a floor plan, and in the back it had the kitchen, and right next to the kitchen it had the servants' hall. Yeah, most of us don't have servants anymore. That was that time is long past, and I don't think anyone who spends any time in a kitchen these days wants to be considered a servant or be put in the back of the house or be kicked to the back of the house. It is interesting though, as we design houses today, one of the things that we will do, especially for something like I don't know, $1 million plus, is do a butler's pantry behind, which is essentially a second kitchen. We're doing a second kitchen behind the kitchen, so we have a place where hired servants for just an evening, meaning caterers, have a place to go and be back of house stuff while the people can entertain and be sitting around the bar and experience the whole house together. So that transition is significant between back of house to front, more or less front of house, center of house. Because what do you do? Here's the question, and here's the dilemma. What do you do with the windows? Kitchens are so incredibly functional that the layout is more important than the outside, than the exterior facade. The function of the kitchen, its primary purpose is to feed, right? To feed the family, to cook, to prep, to feed. Now, one of its primary purposes is the social gathering spot, where that used to be the parlor, the great hall, the living room, that type of stuff. But now it's the kitchen, and so in terms of a hierarchy of rooms, when you're composing a house, man, it throws everything off from a standpoint of exterior design, because now what do you do with the windows as sill heights have shifted up to at least 3 feet and typically 3'4" to 3'6". And so when it's 3'4", 3'6" off the ground, and the rest of your sill heights around the house are going to be 1'6", 1 foot to 2 foot, that's a big difference. And how do you reconcile that difference in a facade and kind of maintain or retain some sort of order? And when you begin to study these old house plans, you'll see how they accomplished it, but once again, it detached the kitchen so far away from all the action. How do you reconcile these things with today's socialization? How society actually functions, how we culturally function. And with this one, honestly, I would love for people to send me, if you have a real awesome traditional design and you've figured out how to reconcile these things, man, send them my way and let me know, because it's one of the most challenging things to figure out how to do. People who are really, really creative can do it. And I'd love to see some examples outside of me. So send them to me. But if we look at a couple plans, once again, if you're watching this, you can see what we're going to look at. If you're listening to it, I'd recommend watching it so you can see what we're looking at. Because, once again, architecture, it's visual. It's a visual thing. You can't really talk about it as well as you can look at it, since that's how you experience architecture. So if we look at a few floor plans here on my tablet, let's just find out, just see where the kitchen is. This is a house from A.J. Downing, who is actually a landscape designer architect / architect from the 1700s. And what we have here is a house plan with its associated rendering next to it. And look at it. So you enter, you got your great hall. To your left, you have a library. Through one of these doorways, you have a drawing room. And then you have the dining room, and then way in the back, you have the kitchen. You have the kitchen, you have a pantry, and this one actually has a water closet. It's interesting because most houses this age don't have indoor plumbing. It wasn't until early 1900s where indoor plumbing even became a thing. And so what do you do with kitchens? And so all that, you had to deal with all that water somehow. And so that's why kitchens, mainly in rural places, were not necessarily a detached structure, but away from the main house, because you had to divert water away from the cellars, away from the basements. And they would just go to little leach pits underneath houses and that type of stuff. And so that's one very practical reason why kitchens weren't really incorporated into houses, was just, what do you do with the waste? And now that we have waste removal systems that are very practical and incorporated into houses, we can deal with them a lot better, and we can incorporate the kitchen into the house. But in terms of bathrooms, an interesting thing that we have today with bathrooms is oftentimes we put them where we need them functionally and not in terms of where they would look on a facade if we were trying to get a window in them, right? So think about it. If you're trying to design a house and you want to get a window or natural light inside of a bathroom, but you need to have but you're trying to create some sort of regular facade or some sort of order to it and keep a consistent window pattern. How big does that bathroom have to be, and where does that window have to be positioned to even start figuring that out? To try to keep the same window that you have on your living room and put that in the bathroom. So like a 3050 window, like 3 feet wide, 5 feet tall, 4 feet wide, 6 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide by 6 feet tall, whatever. Try to put that in the bathroom. That's a big window for a bathroom. That's a huge window for a bathroom. Put it in there and see if you can make it work. Because where do you put the shower? Where do you put the tub? Where do you put the toilet? How big does that bathroom end up being? You don't want the bathroom any larger than you absolutely have to have it. And you can see that it just creates an issue. It creates a problem. And because we've never really wanted to deal with the problem in terms of the exterior facade for residential design in our present world, that's one reason why houses don't look timeless today, is because most home designers haven't been able to reconcile the location of natural light into bathrooms as it relates to exterior facades. It's pretty big, a big topic, but think about it, look at it in your own house, right? And another thing that we've done to bathrooms is we've made them, for master bedrooms particularly, like Roman baths, like enormous places to go, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, once again, think about it in terms of an exterior facade, because in order to achieve timeless design or timeless cities, and something that will be visually sustainable over hundreds of years, you have to have some sort of order and some sort of hierarchy and some sort of system that works. Now think about a bathroom. How do you design a bathroom where there's a tub where you have a window? If you wanted a window next to it, the sill has to be like 2 feet. And then you have a shower, a water closet, a vanity. Okay, now regularize that in the context of a lot, in the context of the house, in the context of itself, in regards to the exterior facade. It is not easy. It's not easy at all. It's a challenge. And that is another reason why most houses aren't timeless. Is we don't concern ourselves with the exterior facade. And when you don't concern yourself with the exterior facade, you can do whatever crap you want, and then it doesn't matter, and you can put stuff wherever you want, and then we love it from the inside. But in terms of the outside, all we got is just the standard hodgepodge McMansion stuff. But we don't do it because it's hard. And that's it, and that's why. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of rigor, a lot of study, a lot of creativity to begin to regularize facades. If you're designing a house in an estate type of setting, which is virtually every lot in the U.S. being developed today, and that's our next podcast topic, by the way, is looking at lots and how lots have changed over time, and why suburban living today is not and can never be the same as timeless, traditional, historic downtowns. Anyway, that's next time. But let's focus on this time. So bathrooms, an issue. They went from being an outhouse, right, for thousands of years, or public baths, that type of thing, for thousands of years, to inside as primary things, primary features and elements. What do you do with that? And the last thing is garages. But before we get to garages, let's look at these things in terms of kitchens. So we've got this kitchen off to the side, and you can see from this they've balanced this out with a greenhouse on one end, the kitchen on the other end, and then the primary volume of the house in the middle. If we go to another house, excuse me, be patient while I bring this up and try to erase some stuff. Let's advance in time. And go up 100 years. Not progress. Let's just travel in time 100 years and look at a couple plans. Here's one on the left. We've got the drawing room, the hall, the dining room, and then way down the hall again is the kitchen, next to these staircases that go up to other servants' quarters. And you have pantries and butlers' kitchens and other things. And that's just how it was, man. And we do not live that way anymore. So when you take this element and you put it right here to be a part of this whole thing, that changes the game quite a bit, because now you're changing exterior lines, which changes roof lines, which changes everything. And there is no problem with that, but how you deal with that is the problem. And most designers got to pick up your game, because they just don't have the rigor and the discipline to design it in an orderly fashion. And because we as a society have been so accepting for how many years? 50 years now, practically, 40 years at least, of just more or less really bad design, but functional design, but bad in terms of its overall visual quality. We've numbed ourselves into thinking that this is good stuff, and that good architecture or good houses can be quantified in terms of whether or not I have the most upgraded countertops and cabinets and flooring, rather than an actual good design. You know what I'm saying? And we have to get away from that. We can't be thinking about the value of our house in the upgrades of what type of materials are being used on the inside, even if because most of the time you upgrade the inside and you downgrade the outside. So let's look at this. Let's look at this bungalow. Enter right into the living room. You got a dining room on one side, a den on the other side, and it goes into 2 bedrooms back in this quadrant. And then on the other side, back through the dining room, is this small detached kitchen, and then a small little water closet at the back end, and a little functional kind of pantry washroom thing. And I just, it's so weird, culturally how things shift over time. In the house that I showed earlier, where I was reading it, and it said the servants' room or servants' hall right next to the kitchen. And then you look at the kitchen almost towards the center of the house in this bungalow, but not quite. It's like, yeah, who was in the kitchen? Were they thought of as servants? It's like, All I can say is I'm really glad I live in today's world. My wife's especially glad we live in today's world, because we know who's the servant around my house, and it's not her. Look at this one. Here's another very interesting one. And fascinating. So this is Andrew Jackson Downing again. Designed 1700s, early 1800s. You enter a hall, you have a drawing room, a dining room, a library. Wow, that's beginning to sound pretty familiar, right? Drawing room, dining room, library. And then you have a bedroom off to the side, probably a guest room, and then you have passages to the offices, and back here you have the butler's pantry and the kitchen. And it's way off, in the middle of nowhere. So when you have a lot where you're pushing setbacks on either side and you've got to get this kitchen into this house somewhere, once again, it's a challenge. So those are 2 really critical things that we have completely screwed up in our kind of contemporary lackadaisical home design that we do today, and just standard home building garbage in reality. And guess what? You live in that, because I live in that. I live in a good old 1990s standard piece of garbage. And the quality is great. It's brick, and it's got concrete tile roofs, and it's honestly a great quality house. But in terms of the design, it's not timeless. You can look at it and be like, yeah, that was built in the 90s. Look at its beige brick. It's awesome. And all of these other things we've just been looking at, you can probably tell what century they were built, but in the end, they're timeless. They still look great, and they continue to age with beauty. And that's the point. So, let's finish this up by looking at kind of the final, most nefarious problem of today's world. And it's not that it's a bad thing. What it is a what on earth do we do with it thing. Because we're not getting rid of our cars, right? Even if we have electric cars, we're going to still have cars. Even if there's a gas shortage and we run out of gas, we run out of petroleum, we run out of whatever, which I don't think we will, by the way. I think we're always going to come up with some way, because we love our cars. We're going to come up with some way to drive, period. Whether that's electric or some other fuel source or whatever, cars aren't going away because we love them. And they're cool. I was driving with my wife in a neighborhood about 1.5 years ago, and it was an old turn-of-the-century type, lots of small cottages. And she was just commenting how charming and how wonderful, how beautiful this neighborhood was. And I wanted her to understand something, because I asked her a question. I said, look around, what's missing? Think about that for a second. Go think about that neighborhood or the latest neighborhood that's turn of the century, meaning turning from 1800 to 1900. Really charming. What is omitted? What is not? What's not there? Garages. There are no garages on the front of houses because cities were built for people and not cars. That's just how they were. Because when you walked out of your house, it was you and your feet or you and your horse, and you walked to wherever it is you needed to go. And so we'll get into that next time, but it's really important. Let's just cover it really quickly this time. Lot configurations. Lots were narrow and deep, so you could pack more houses right next to each other because you needed to get to the end of the block faster in order to get to the store or wherever it was that you're going. Whereas now lots are wide and shallow, or square rather than narrow and deep. And so when they're narrow and deep, you don't have room to put a 2, 3, 4 car garage on the front of your house. But then when it's wide and shallow, you can. So because we're putting garages in the front of our house now, what we've just done is we have, rather than building cities for people, which is what they used to be designed for, cities for people, houses for people, what we now have is a bunch of vehicular storage units. Oh, and the people live behind it. Sorry, that's the honest truth. That is the absolute honest truth. And what we've done is we've taken beauty and replaced it with convenience. And that's kind of our highest good, our highest value in today's society is convenience, efficiency. Welcome to the modern world, right? That is the end, the ultimate aim is how to make something more efficient and convenient. And front-loaded, meaning front entry drives into a garage, that is really efficient and convenient. It's honestly a lot more efficient and convenient than going through an alley to a garage in the backyard and then having to walk from the garage in the backyard to the front. In some places, what they would do is they would still put the garage in the back, and it was a single-car garage, and then they would still come off the front, so they didn't have alleys. They'd come off the front, but it was still a small garage in the back. Now that we just have so much more stuff than they ever used to have, where do we put it, right? Bigger garage. And now that kids didn't used to have cars, but we've designed cities now in a way that all the kids have to have a car. Once you turn 16, 17, 18, wherever you are, all of a sudden you have to have a car. Otherwise, you can't get anywhere because of the way the cities are configured. That's problematic. That's enormously problematic. And so what we live in now is just a bunch of vehicular storage units with residences attached. And I don't know how else to describe it, but that way. And here's a fascinating thing, is there used to be horses, right? There used to be carriages. You still had to put a carriage and a horse somewhere. But where would you put a carriage and a horse? You didn't want it close to the house because the horse didn't smell very good and it invited a whole lot of flies. So it'd be in the back. And that's where the horseless carriage, the automobile, right? The horseless carriage, that's where it began. The storage place for that began in the house. And so it was this transition. And so why did houses get incorporated into, or why did garages get incorporated into houses? That's the question. They got incorporated just in a matter of convenience, during the mid-last century, when the modern aesthetic and goal was more or less to say, hey, look how many awesome cars I have, right? Sometimes not, but most of the time, man, it was all about the wind in my hair, convertible, I've got a car. Oh man, look how many cars I have. I now have 2 cars. I've got a 2-car carport. Oh, now I've got a 2-car enclosed carport, which is a garage, and that's even better. Now I've got a 3-car garage, and it just kept going. I passed a house just yesterday that had a 4-car, and there was no house left. It was just garage and then a door for the front door, and then all the house was behind it. And that was how we chose to dignify the pedestrians on the street. But because there's no pedestrians on the street anymore, we don't need to dignify it, because all streets are anyway is just vehicular circulation things rather than an actual street. We used to build cities for people. Now we build cities for cars. That is the primary reason why cities are not timeless and why we don't have timeless homes. That is the primary reason. So there's a lot more to it, but this is not an easy fix, because the fix has to do with zoning, and it has to do with development patterns, and it has to do with lot configurations before it even has to do with houses. And that's a much bigger problem than any home builder can even deal with, or any personal individual can deal with, unless you happen to live in an area in the Midwest, back east, or old part of the Western United States, or somewhere else on the planet that actually you get a lot in an old traditional neighborhood that is shallow and deep with an alley behind it where you can configure a garage and you don't have setbacks requiring you to put these things so far away from this and that and the other. In the end, so that's our coverage. That's what we're going to cover today. Hope you enjoyed it, because this is so important. And people have asked me, so many times, what the problem is, what's the difference, and you don't realize it. You really don't realize it. You have no idea that when you're driving down this cute neighborhood, this beautiful neighborhood, this old traditional neighborhood, there's something missing, and it's garages, because this city was designed for you as a person and not you as a car with a person in it. And until we can get our zoning back to a place where we design houses and cities for people and not car storage units, we will never have timeless homes again. You can make a garage pretty. You can make them really, really nice. You really can. I've seen them. I've done them. But we should be doing houses for people and not houses for cars. So hopefully that was okay for you guys. So we will continue this next time with lot configurations, just show you how things transitioned. And then we're going to be, after that, getting into the heart and meat of hierarchy, order, and all that type of stuff, in terms of if we get some things right, then we can get other things right, and then we can get timeless homes again. This is Clayton Vance. See you next time. Ciao.